So we were in the last class speaking about the very first individual from the genus Homo, whom we have actually come across in cultural evolution as well. At that time we almost concluded that erectus from the lower Paleolithic must have been the first fellow to have culture. He must have been the first individual, not simply that had stood erect, but he was also the first person who must have spoken a constructive language. He must have been the person who must have used fire for the first time, and maybe perhaps he was the first tool maker as well. Now we will be continuing with Homo erectus in today's class. Those of you, when I was sharing some pictures with you, these were certain things that I was asking you to make a note of before I could walk into the class. Habilis based theories, good number of them. We spoke for the first time in yesterday's class Alan Walker's theory that was having threefold evolution from afferences, and then one other model that you had done in the previous times. I'm saying it again to you, sir. If you are absent to the classes, I'm not responsible for your not understanding things. Later you don't blame me. It's not a magical stick that you do abracadabra and then the entire thing comes to you. You'll have to slog out. You'll have to rub your dash out. I mean, it's very, very difficult thing to go through the exam. But then it's very easy to blame it later. So generally what happens is when you clear the exam, all the credit lies with you. When you have failed, the responsibility lies with other people. You should have the guts to bear the blame also if things go wrong. See, for me, more than 90% of work lies with the student. We only tell you this is what you'll have to study, this is what you're not supposed to do. Our role ends there itself. We are not the people who are going to memorize for you. We are not the people who are going to write for you. So do not have too many expectations from especially civil services teachers that they are going to revolutionize your life and then create something from nothing kind of. Of course, we already know the difference between nothing and nothing by now. Today we will watch a movie. We'll enjoy the movie first. And by the way, I have uploaded one movie in your Dropbox. I'm sure you must have watched, some of you. If at all, no, Saturday, tomorrow you're writing your test? Saturday, I think by 11 o'clock you'll come here, grace the occasion. And try writing down every bit of information, then we will continue with writing the notes. We'll start with the basic map of spread of Homo erectus. If at all we have the world map with us, if there is no world map, I know you are used to drawing world map. You finish that map, then we will. Many known sites are there: Swartzkrans, Olduvai,  Zaucaudion, Java, Within Java, of course, several names there. Is it visible to the last? Finish writing from Asia. That is pronounced as Saleh. Don't say something else. H though is not there, you have to pronounce that way. Turnifine, Obaidian, Diminissi. It is pronounced as Diminissi. Question mark, still to be confirmed. Can I go? Actually, that's something like a borderline. I mean, it's something like it's like early humans lived exclusively south of that region. It's almost function like a border there. Maybe you can draw a line, you need not have to shade and all. Am I allowed to go quickly? So principally, three variants we see in erectus. One is the African fellow, the other is European fellow, the third is Asian fellow. Within Asia, two subvariants are there. One is the China man, the other is the Narmada man. So if at all a sumptuous question has to be asked by the examiner, it can be Homo erectus of different geographical regions. If it is a 25 marker, either you are there or out of the race. These are some of the questions which, see, Homo erectus had been asked traditionally for a small question. But my expectation is he should come with a big question. Because we know very well that many students mug up things for Homo erectus, go vomit on the paper. But that's not what we want. Questions which were traditionally asked for 25 markers or big questions, they were from either Astrolo or from Neanderthal. Now for your exam, you try to prepare for a question such as geographical variants of Homo erectus. Geographical variants of Homo erectus. I was thinking of something. See, there are a few other students who are writing, tests, I mean once a week kind of, the ones who have already finished the entire syllabus. So what I was thinking was maybe the question papers that we are giving to them and the kind of key sheets we have been circulating to them, based on how you are finishing your syllabus, I thought I would share them with you, so that you will also be parallelly looking at the questions, how an answer can be written. You already have a key with you, so that particular related tests are coming up for you, you will be in a better position to approach them. So this was what I was thinking today, but I'll have to segregate the question papers, which I'll have to share with you based on how you are finishing your syllabus. So maybe in the weekend I will try to put about 20 odd questions so that you get an idea of what we are doing with the other people. You will also start coming into that test mode. We'll just give it a small break and finish off with that.
Humans. Without a doubt, the smartest animal on Earth. Yet we're unmistakably tied to our ape origins. Millions of years ago, we were apes living ape lives in Africa. So how did we get from that to this? What happened? What set us on the path to humanity? The questions are huge, but now there are answers. At the threshold of humanity, one ancestor contains tantalizing secrets. It is known as Homo erectus.
Homo erectus had a slightly smaller brain, slightly bigger jaw, but it's basically us.
Basically us, almost 2 million years ago. New finds are revealing the truth about the ancestors at the heart of our evolution. Here were the trailblazers who first left Africa, the first fire makers, the first hunters.
These creatures were capable of analyzing possible uses of tools and coming up with a technological solution to the problem of how do you kill a big dangerous animal without getting killed yourself.
Homo erectus pioneered what it means to be human, colonizing whole continents and creating the first human societies.
Our ancestors began to care about what others thought and care about what that individual thought about them.
Now, new discoveries are bringing them alive as never before. At last, we come face to face with the ancestors at the birth of humanity, right now on Nova.
Major funding for NOVA is provided by the following.
The Great Rift Valley of East Africa. 2 million years ago, these spectacular plains and canyons witnessed a mysterious event. The birth of the first ancestor we can really call human. New discoveries are revealing a creature surprisingly like us. A world traveler, a toolmaker, a hunter, tamer of fire, creator of the first human societies. Amazingly, the qualities that make us human began not with our own species, Homo sapiens. The true birth of humanity began much further back in time, millions of years ago. Imagine the entire span of recorded human history, about 5,000 years, taking us back to the Egyptian pyramids. Double it, 10,000 years, to the time when plants are domesticated and agriculture begins. Double it again, 20,000 years. Ice Age hunters are painting stunning images on cave walls, and keep doubling 6 more times. Only then do we encounter our ancestor, Homo erectus, in Africa's Great Rift Valley. For millions of years, this massive geological fault line running the length of East Africa was a stage on which our human evolution was played out. It all started with the first apes to walk upright on 2 legs, about 6 million years ago. There were many different types, all variations on the same theme. Ape-like creatures with small brains. The fossil known as Lucy is the most famous example. Here she is, just 3 foot 8 inches tall, with a brain the size of a chimp's. For millions of years, creatures like her roamed the forests and grasslands of Africa. But then, something changed. About 2 million years ago, new creatures appeared with abilities never seen before in the animal kingdom. Meet Homo erectus, a toolmaker and hunter. One of the first members of our genus, the genus Homo, humans.
The transition to Homo was probably one of the most important transformations that occurred in human evolution.
Arms got thinner, legs got longer, brains got bigger. It was a huge evolutionary step from ape bodies to bodies like ours. But what about the things that make us distinctly human? Creativity, intelligence, caring for each other. How can we know when these got started? With only skulls and bone fragments to go on, how could we ever know what those first humans were really like? It would take a momentous find to shed light on their lives. Lake Turkana, northern Kenya. Surrounded by volcanoes and vast expanses of baking desert. In 1984, famed anthropologists Richard and Neve Leakey were working at this remote inland sea.
I was actually on the east side of the lake, and then Richard flew over and said, "You've got to come, there's something really exciting."
As the first family of paleoanthropology, the Leakeys were used to fossil finds. But this was very special. One of Leakey's team had found a skull fragment of one of those early humans. He could tell from its size and shape it was Homo erectus. And there was more than just a fragment.
So we started looking at this site on a more extensive basis, and of course, once we did, we found the rest of the skull.
A complete skull was rare enough, but it was just the beginning. Soon, parts of the Homo erectus skeleton, which had never been found before, started to emerge.
We couldn't believe it, but we started getting pieces of ribs These were parts of Homo erectus that nobody actually knew about, nobody had ever seen before. So every bone that came out of the ground was something brand new to science, and we were looking at these things, and it was really amazing.
And here they are, the actual bones of a human ancestor who lived over 1.5 million years ago. It's the earliest human skeleton ever discovered. The Leakeys called him Turkana Boy. His bones have revolutionized our understanding of the transition from ape to human.
The really important thing about Turkana Boy is how complete he is. We've got arms and legs and bits of his spine and his ribs. And usually when we find these things, we get very excited about one little bit of bone. But that little bit can't tell us very much about an individual. So having a nearly complete skeleton, we can start to ask big questions.
The first big question was, what did he look like? His skeleton tells us he was 5 feet 3 inches tall, with a build closer to a man's than an ape's. But how close? Paleo artist Victor Dieck specializes in painting and sculpting our human ancestors with precise anatomical accuracy. Victor's going to add Turkana Boy to his family of ancient faces.
At this stage of the game, I know that Turkana Boy is not an ape. He is a very early true human. And so here we have a modern human skull. The faces are very similar to one another, but Turkana Boy's skull is a bit more primitive and has a lower forehead and a much smaller brain capacity.
Victor will build Turkana Boy's face muscle by muscle, based on his studies of cadavers and modern anatomy. While his head may be primitive, Turkana Boy's skeleton is surprisingly human. His hips are a little wider, his arms a little longer, but his overall body shape is just like ours.
Turkana Boy and Erectus, that's something that if you were to see from 100 feet away, you would think, well, there's a large naked man there, or woman, or you know, but it's a human.
It will take Victor a week to flesh out Turkana Boy's face. Meanwhile, a team of animators is at work creating scenes that will bring Turkana Boy and his people to life. To make sure they do it accurately, they have enlisted the help of Harvard anthropologist Dan Lieberman.
They had a more forward position of the palms when they ran. Just slightly. There you go.
The blue-suited actors are there to create movement references for the artists. In the final animations, they will be replaced by Homo erectus bodies.
And action!
Their heads and faces based closely on Victor's model. As Turkana Boy's forensically reconstructed head nears completion, a face emerges that looks a lot like us. Now, for the first time in 1.5 million years, here he is, our ancestor, the Homo erectus, called Turkana Boy. But what he looked like is only the beginning of his story. To reconstruct his life, we need to find out how old he was.
And if we look at his skeleton, we can see that the growth plates on his limbs that would fuse when he's fully adult are all unfused. So even though he's very tall, we know that he's still growing.
The fact that Turkana Boy was not fully grown has turned out to be a boon to researchers.
You can answer questions like, did the boy grow up like a modern human? Or did he grow up more like an ape?
Turkana Boy was already 5 feet 3 inches tall.
When scientists compared his bones and teeth to ours, he seemed to be about 14 years old. But when dental specialist Chris Dean began to study his teeth, he was in for a shock. It turns out that all teeth, fossil or not, preserve a remarkably precise record of childhood.
This is a fossil tooth, and we can see the enamel cap, which covers the core of the tooth, which is made of dentine. Dentine is just another word for ivory. And within the enamel, you can see the rods, which are running from the enamel-dentine junction here out to the surface of the tooth.
Enamel has a regular growth pattern like the rings of a tree. Under an electron microscope, it looks like rods made of tiny beads.
Each of the little beads along these prisms represent one day's growth, because the cells which produce enamel are actually under the influence of a circadian or daily clock. And those secretions during the day speed up and then slow down, and there's a permanent record of that in every tooth. So you can see rods running all the way through this tissue, and every day along the rod there is a wobble where the tissue slows down and then speeds up.
So if you count the beads in these strings, you can figure out exactly how many days that tooth has been growing. When Chris looked at the fossilized teeth of Turkana Boy, he got a huge surprise. Turkana Boy wasn't 14 years old, he was 8.
What that implies is that the growth of the Turkana Boy resembled more closely that of chimpanzees today.
To be 5'3" at age 8, Turkana Boy must have grown up very fast, at a rate closer to chimps than us. A chimpanzee's childhood is short. It is sexually mature at about 7. Human childhood is longer. We reach puberty at about 12. So as humans evolved from apes, childhood was extended. But what advantage could be gained by having helpless children around to feed and care for who take so long to grow up? The mystery of prolonged childhood is at the heart of human evolution. It may be related to brain size. We humans have the biggest brains in the animal kingdom in relation to our body size. They're so big that most of our brain growth has to happen outside the womb, or our heads would never get through the birth canal. A long, slow childhood gives our brains time to grow after birth, and time to learn everything we need to function in our complex human societies. That's the advantage of prolonged childhood, for us at least. But what about Turkana Boy? His brain was 900 cubic centimeters, smaller than ours, but more than twice as large as a chimp's. So was he on the way to thinking and talking like us? Ralph Holloway believes he was. He's been collecting the brain endocasts of human ancestors for over 30 years. An endocast is a mold taken from the inside of the skull, which reveals the shape of the brain. Ralph is particularly interested in something called the Broca's area.
Broca's area is involved with memory functions, executive functions, but it does have a very important role to play in the motor aspects of speech.
In the brain of Turkana Boy, Ralph believes he sees evidence for something remarkable. A change in the Broca's area tied to communication.
Broca's caps regions on the Turkana Boy are fully modern in terms of their appearance. It is good, solid evidence for having the ability of symbolic communication. In other words, language.
It's a controversial idea, and we'll never know for sure if Turkana Boy could speak. And Africa was filled with it.
The one high-quality resource that's probably most important for the evolution of the genus Homo is meat, and meat byproducts such as brain and marrow and fat. They're high in protein, they're high in calories, and they're easy to digest. But the one problem with getting meat is that it's hard to get.
Most predators rely on strength or speed to kill their prey. Our ancestors had neither. Today, we are on top of the food chain, so it's hard to imagine the predicament of those early humans. Here was a slow-moving creature with no claws or fangs, easy prey for the hungry predators around him.
This is a fossil forehead and brow ridge of a Homo erectus. And on the brow ridge, you can see the bite mark of a carnivore. Well, this reminds us that these Homo erectus individuals weren't at the top of the food chain.
So how did Turkana Boy, a weakling with a big brain which needed calories, get his meat?
Homo erectus faced a problem. How do you kill a big dangerous animal that has lots of meat and fat in it without that animal also killing you?
I think the answer to that was a very clever set of innovations, and that is endurance running and high activity in the middle of the day.
The ancestors of Homo erectus, small, hairy apes like Lucy, were bipedal but probably didn't do much running. But Turkana Boy's kind were built to run, like us.
This is an accelerometer. It weighs
Dan Lieberman believes they could run long distances because, like us, they had lost their thick coat of body hair and could keep cool by sweating. This was the key to their success. But how do we know if these crucial changes go back all the way to Turkana Boy's time, over 1 million years ago? Skin and hair are rarely preserved in the fossil record. So to find out, we have to look to a creature that's been intimately connected with hair for a long time, the louse.
All animals seem to have some type of lice that parasitize them. Mammals have them, birds have them, even fish have types of lice. But most other creatures have only one type of lice that parasitize them.
Humans have one kind of louse on their heads and another in the pubic area. Geneticist Mark Stoneking asked himself why.
The answer that seems obvious is that when we had body hair all over our bodies, we had one type of lice, but then we became hairless until we only had hair on our heads and in our pubic region. And so therefore you would have this hairless geographic barrier to contact between the two.
Mark was surprised to find out that the human pubic louse is very different from the human head louse. Somehow, in the past, it seems to have come from gorillas.
Because the pubic lice is actually more closely related to gorilla lice. Now, how it is our ancestors got pubic lice from gorillas, I wouldn't care to speculate. But nonetheless, one needs gorilla lice in order to really work this whole thing out.
The most likely scenario is that when we lost our body hair, the original human louse migrated to our heads, leaving the pubic area temporarily unpopulated by lice. When our ancestors had contact with gorillas, perhaps sleeping in their nests or scavenging their bodies for meat, the gorilla louse colonized their pubic region. Eventually, it turned into the human pubic louse of today. So if we could find out when the human pubic louse and the gorilla louse diverged, we would have a rough idea of when we lost our body hair. Fortunately, there's a way to figure that out. The genetic dating technique known as the molecular clock. It's based on the fact that the sequence of chemical bases which make up DNA mutate at a regular rate.
It's just a very simple idea that the rate of change in DNA sequences is more or less constant over time. And that means that you have a way of determining when two species last shared a common ancestor.
By counting the number of differences in the genetic code of two species, scientists can determine how long they've been evolving away from each other. When Mark used the molecular clock to count the differences between the DNA of gorilla lice and human pubic lice, he came up with a date for their divergence.
The estimated date for the divergence is roughly 3 million years ago.
That means long before Turkana Boy, maybe even around Lucy's time, our ancestors had slowly begun to lose their body hair. Turkana was mostly hairless, just like us. And that may be what gave him an edge over other predators. Most animals are at a disadvantage in the midday sun because they overheat. They can only cool down by panting. And when they run fast, they can't pant. That means they can only run in short sprints.
Quadrupeds can gallop for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then they overheat. But hominids can cool down by sweating. They use their entire body like a dog's tongue.
Our hairless bodies allow air to circulate freely on our skin and cool us down as sweat evaporates. This makes us one of the best long-distance runners in the animal kingdom. Dan Lieberman believes this gave our ancestors the ability to hunt in a very unusual way. It's called persistence hunting. And he believes the modern ethnographic record can show us how it was done. The Bushmen of the Kalahari offer us an insight into how Homo erectus might have hunted 2 million years ago. The Bushmen know that at midday, animals rest in the shade, which is why it's the perfect time to be hunting. Once they locate their prey, in this case a kudu, the marathon begins. Their strategy is simple: run it to exhaustion. Every time the animal tries to rest, the hunters track it down and get it moving again. They never give it a chance to cool down. And the reason they can keep going is that they can sweat. So if the theory is right, the Bushman hunt may help explain how Turkana got his meat. Homo erectus had come up with an innovative way of feeding his hungry brain. In this modern hunt, the Bushmen ran in the fierce heat for over 4 hours. The kudu was finally immobilized by heat stroke. Turkana wouldn't have had steel-tipped spears like the Bushmen, but he wouldn't have needed them.
Homo erectus probably hunted with close quarters weapons, with spears that were thrown at animals from a short distance, clubs, thrown rocks, weapons like that. They weren't using long-distance projectile weapons that we know of.
The Homo erectus hunt was simple but effective. It fed not just their larger brains, but the growing complexity of that early human society. There are other social animals, but none quite like us. Society is in every corner of our lives. Our relationships, communication, rules, symbolism, all the things that bind us together. What's behind it? Why do we become so social? Could it have something to do with another innovation? Something unprecedented in our evolution. Building fires and cooking.
Here we've got erectus, the first species that looks like us. And I think only cooking can explain the magnitude of this change.
The earliest evidence that our ancestors deliberately used fire for cooking dates to long after Turkana time. But Richard Wrangham is sure Homo erectus was building fires much earlier.
Now, for the first time, we had a species that was committed to living on the ground because they lose their climbing adaptations. Well, how were they sleeping? They had to be able to protect themselves from wild animals.
On the African savanna, full of predators who hunt by night, Richard believes Turkana and his people couldn't have survived without fire. And he thinks only cooking, which makes food more soft and digestible, can explain why Homo erectus evolved smaller teeth and a much smaller gut.
These things are compatible with the reduced cost of digestion produced by cooking food. Nothing else is.
As our ancestors reaped the benefits of cooking, something else happened too, at least according to Wrangham. We became more social.
Humans have this wonderfully calm temperament compared to chimpanzees, say. Where did it come from? We were drawn to a common place, the fireplace.
Wrangham believes we learn to share and communicate, sitting around fires, waiting for food to cook. It's speculative, but one thing is for sure. In the Homo erectus world, new social relationships had to be evolving. The bonds between mothers and children must have been very different from the apes.
For example, a mother orangutan will not allow any other individual to take her infant, will be in constant skin-to-skin contact with that baby for at least the first 6 months of life, not a moment out of contact.
Secure in this unbreakable mother-infant bond, ape babies need less capacity to read the intentions of others than human babies, whose bond with their mothers is surprisingly less secure. The shocking fact is that human mothers abandon their infants much more often than ape mothers. Infanticide by a mother is more common among humans than any other higher ape.
Maternal commitment is a lot more contingent in humans than it seems to be in other apes.
Unlike most primates, human mothers share parenting with others. A child's survival can depend on making itself appealing to a number of caregivers. Perhaps that's why human infants have evolved a uniquely acute sensitivity.
Human infants are born connoisseurs of mothers, reading her facial expression, looking for signs of commitment.
We are born hardwired with an awareness of the intentions and emotions of others, which is unique in the animal world.
When did humans develop this gift for attributing mental states and feelings to others and for caring about what others thought about them?
Could these social instincts have developed with Homo erectus, along with cooperative hunting, bigger brains, longer childhoods, and the use of fire? Perhaps Turkana Boy and his people already had social skills that would be familiar to us. Here were intelligent social beings with an increasing capacity for cooperation. It may be this that made possible another great achievement, the exodus from Africa. For millions of years, our earliest ancestors stayed on the African savannas. But at some point, they started to leave. Ancient fossil skulls and tools have been found as far away as China and Indonesia. The question is, when did they leave Africa and why? When Turkana Boy was found, scientists thought they had the answer. Here was a strong, large-brained ancestor capable of an arduous migration. He had the look of a world conqueror.
In the mid-1980s, we were thinking that a hominid like this one had left Africa, but had done it maybe about 1 million years ago.
For decades, scientists believed big strapping humans like Turkana Boy left Africa 1 million years ago. But new discoveries are showing the migration may have started a lot earlier than that. Dmanisi, Georgia. The mountains and plains of the Caucasus, thousands of miles from the Great Rift Valley, had never produced any fossils of early human ancestors. But then, an astonishing discovery was made.
It was a lower jaw with teeth downward, this way in the ground. So when I started to clean, those front teeth came to light. It became obvious to me that we had found some kind of hominid. But what kind?
The jaw seemed to be a primitive form of Homo erectus. But at first, hardly anyone believed it.
In 91, when we found this jaw, a lot of scientists were quite skeptical about it. Because it was very hard to imagine Georgia, Caucasus, to be on the map of the human evolution.
Since then, Dmanisi has been put on the map of human evolution in a big way. The site has turned up a treasure trove of Homo erectus fossils. They've transformed our understanding of who left Africa and when. They showed that the first humans to leave Africa were much more primitive than Turkana Boy.
People thought that hominids that left Africa were very tall, like Turkana Boy, with big brains, advanced technology, and Dmanisi proved the opposite.
At 4.5 feet tall, they were smaller than Turkana Boy, with more ape-like shoulders and a simple stone technology.
They are much more primitive, they have small brains, and at the same time they were using very primitive stone tools.
The next surprise came when they dated the site. The ancient Dmanisi landscape has been built up layer by layer over millions of years. 1.81 million years ago, massive volcanic eruptions deposited a layer of ash. The fossils sat on top of this ash, so must have been slightly younger, around 1.8 million years old. To the vast majority of scientists who believe that all our ancestors evolved in Africa, this was a stunning surprise. How had a small, primitive Homo erectus migrated to the Caucasus almost 2 million years ago, long before Turkana Boy? Scientists now accept that as soon as Homo erectus appeared on the savannas of Africa, they started to leave.
Suddenly, with the origin of Homo erectus, we get this shift in body shape, and then boom, they're out of Africa right away.
The Georgia fossils proved that Homo erectus left Africa much earlier than previously thought. An even more provocative find shows the migration may have started even earlier. 5,000 miles from Africa, the island of Flores, Indonesia. In 2003, researchers made a discovery so strange, nobody knew what to make of it. They found the bones of a tiny human ancestor, just over 3 feet tall, even smaller than the Dmanisi fossils. They called this baffling new ancestor Homo floresiensis, and because of its tiny size, nicknamed it the Hobbit.
And this has created a tremendous amount of grief because we're not really sure of what we're seeing here. The size of the Hobbit brain endocast is roughly 400 cc's.
That's barely bigger than the brain of Lucy, the famous bipedal ape from 3 million years ago.
It's not just a small brain and a primitive-looking face, but the foot's primitive, the hand's primitive, the leg is primitive.
The lower limb is very much like the Lucy skeleton. That was a big surprise.
And in the cave where this primitive creature was found, they also uncovered stone tools, something Lucy never had.
People have for a long time said, well, you need a big brain to make stone tools. Well, okay, if Homo floresiensis is making stone tools, this creature has the brain the size of an orange. Clearly that equation's gone.
Everything about these creatures is an enigma. Where did they come from? And what were they?
Some researchers have argued that Floresiensis is just a dwarfed population of modern people that suffered some kind of disease that caused them to both dwarf and have relatively small brains.
But when scientists took a closer look, most saw no evidence of disease. The stone tools and the shape of the face moved the focus to our old friend, Homo erectus.
Some researchers think that Homo floresiensis evolved from Homo erectus.
But how did they get so small? Something called island dwarfism may be the answer. Isolated on islands with limited food, large mammals sometimes shrink over time. On Flores, there were once pygmy elephants the size of cows. Could the same evolutionary pressure have acted on Homo erectus to produce the hobbit? Or was this mysterious creature descended from an even more primitive ancestor?
So perhaps we're sampling a period which is at the very beginning of the Homo lineage.
So whatever the hobbit was, perhaps its ancestors were the very first wave of migration out of Africa. Some unknown creature, part bipedal ape like Lucy, and part Homo erectus.
So if that's the case, then what we see in Indonesia makes sense. It's kind of a body that existed before human bodies became more modern.
What would push such primitive creatures out of Africa? A key driving force behind the migration was probably a climate shift, which spread grasslands from Africa into Asia. And with the grasses went the game animals.
Animals are going to be moving out of Africa, and the hominids will just be keeping pace with those animals. After all, that's their livelihood.
Of course, our ancestors didn't know they were leaving Africa. They just followed the animals they depended on, through the Sinai up into the Middle East and beyond. It's often been called an exodus, but it really wasn't like that.
When people think of Exodus, they think of the Bible, or they think of migration, they think of Europeans coming over here to the New World. It probably wasn't like any historical migration, this dispersal of humans out of Africa.
The process was probably very, very slow, much like the spread of any other animal species into new territories.
You could imagine a group of Homo erectus moving their range 1 kilometer a year in one direction, and doing that continually over a long enough period of time, you can get the distance from Africa to Indonesia covered in, say, 15,000 years.
By 1 million years ago, our ancestors had populated Asia from the Caucasus to Indonesia. And they were in Europe too, as a recent discovery in Spain has shown. Homo erectus had conquered the old world. The fact that they made it so far with limited technology and relatively small brains makes them seem even more remarkable. And their longevity was astonishing. A few pockets of Homo erectus may have been still clinging on in Asia just 50,000 years ago. That's a span of 2 million years. Our own species has only been around for 200,000. What was the secret of Homo erectus's success? The amazing finds at Dmanisi have given us one last clue. One of the skulls belonged to an old man. His jawbone revealed he had lost all his teeth well before he died.
That was a real surprise. It means that this individual survived 2 years without teeth.
For an elder to have survived that long without teeth must mean that others in the group were feeding him, perhaps even chewing his food for him.
I love this story. This was a remarkable testimony from the past about the quality of emotional life that may have characterized Homo erectus.
Here is a tantalizing clue to what may be this ancestor's most important legacy: the instinct to look after each other. And it helps us imagine Turkana-Boy's final day on Earth. In the animator's scenario, he starts the day out on a hunt. But he has trouble keeping up with the hunting party. Why? The evidence from his skeleton is that he was sick and in pain at the time he died.
If we look at his lower jaw, we can see right here under the teeth that we've got a bit of an abscess and an infection. That kind of an infection could have entered the rest of his body, could have killed him.
An abscess that ate away that much of his jawbone would have been agonizing. Turkana-Boy is in so much pain, he's unable to continue the hunt. Knowing he would be looked after, perhaps he returned to his campsite to find comfort among the females.
I think he was probably a miserable fellow, in a lot of pain and very dependent on support and handouts. So it was a species that already felt that he's one of our weaklings that, you know, we love and must protect and care for to have got him that far.
But however much they may have wanted to help him, there was nothing they could do about the infection that was probably spreading through his body.
From what the evidence suggests, I just always imagined him not knowing what was wrong with him. And there's a sadness to it. But ultimately from that comes this immortal being.
His skeleton was so complete, it is likely he died in water, which would have protected him.
It's very unusual to get a skeleton because normally these things are eaten by carnivores. And in this case, it seems that the boy's body was washed into a swamp, and so the carnivores never saw it and never destroyed it. And it gradually decomposed, and as the rivers flooded, brought in more sediment, buried it. And you could see footprints of hippos that had walked all over the bones, and some of the ribs and things were standing vertically instead of lying flat on the ground. And you could sort of reconstruct the situation and how the boy, what had happened after he died and why he was complete. It really was an amazing experience to see it.
For almost 2 million years, his bones were preserved by the earth. Their discovery opened a window for us on an unknown world. The world of the most successful human ancestor of all time, Homo erectus. They've revealed to us that mysterious moment when almost everything human was born. Our bodies, our minds, our emotions. Think of all we've become. Trace the threads of our origins through the ancestors who went before. They all lead back to Turkana-Boy and his kind, the first humans.
This NOVA program is available on DVD and Blu-ray at shoppbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS.
See, the reason why I wanted you to see this in the classes, the kind of imposing facts and several questions that have been generally troubling the mankind for a long time. Because I'm sure when you are doing your school, you must have read this in your science books, that man had originated from Africa. Though we never understood what it meant, we accepted because it was said as such. Certain names I make it mandatory for you to know from that document. I'm sure you were writing. There is this. I also wanted you to see the couple Liki, how excited she was, as if she has given rise to a family of a dozen or so. When they have discovered the fossil, that kind of excitement, that's how it is. When you have discovered something which the rest of the world didn't know till then. This is something really interesting. For me, in the entire discussion, what is more interesting is there is one man somewhere there, Victor Bleek, making his career by preparing the molds of the facial molds of the primitive man. So certain names I have written, from that documentary only. One was Susan Anton, Victor Bleek, then there was this man Holloway, who was talking about skull molds studies and Broca's area and how language articulation capabilities have increased. And those are the three very important people. And then, sir, one question that was asked some time back in UPSC was Homo heidelbergensis. And that is there in your syllabus, mentioned in your syllabus, Homo heidelbergensis. This is nothing but one of the last fossils that was discussed there, called the Moyer's jaw. In the Moyer's jaw, when she was studying, Susan Anton was studying, she makes it a point that there is a kind of damage in the Turkana boy's body, especially in the lower jaw, the kind of holes that she finds that must have led to, we'll just see, if at all we are able to hear it.
And their longevity was astonishing. A few pockets of Homo erectus may have been still clinging on in Asia just 50,000 years ago. That's a span of 2 million years. Our own species has only been around for 200,000. What was the secret of Homo erectus's success? The amazing finds at Dmanisi have given us one last clue. One of the skulls belonged to an old man. His jawbone revealed he had lost all his teeth well before he died.
That was a real surprise. It means that this individual survived 2 years without teeth.
For an elder to have survived that long without teeth must mean that others in the group were feeding him, perhaps even chewing his food for him.
I love this story. This was a remarkable testimony from the past about the quality of emotional life that may have characterized Homo erectus.
Here is a tantalizing clue to what may be this ancestor's most important legacy: the instinct to look after each other. And it helps us imagine Turkana Boy's final day on Earth. In the animator's scenario, he starts the day out on a hunt. But he has trouble keeping up with the hunting party. Why? The evidence from his skeleton is that he was sick and in pain at the time he died.
If we look at his lower jaw, we can see right here under the teeth that we've got a bit of an abscess and an infection. That kind of an infection could have entered the rest of his body, could have killed him.
An abscess that ate away that much of his jawbone would have been agonizing. Turkana Boy is in so much pain, he's unable to continue the hunt. Knowing he would be looked after, perhaps he returned to his campsite to find comfort among the females.
I think he was probably a miserable fellow, in a lot of pain and very dependent on support and handouts. So it was a species that already felt that he's one of our weaklings that, you know, we love and must protect and care for to have got him that far.
But however much they may have wanted to help him, there was nothing they could do about the infection that was probably spreading through his body.
From what the evidence suggests, I just always imagined him not knowing what was wrong with him. And there's a sadness to it. But ultimately from that comes this immortal being.
His skeleton was so complete, it is likely he died in water, which would have protected him.
It's very unusual to get a skeleton because normally these things are eaten by carnivores. And in this case, it seems that the boy's body was washed into a swamp, and so the carnivores never saw it and never destroyed it. And it gradually decomposed, and as the rivers flooded, brought in more sediment, buried it. And you could see footprints of hippos that had walked all over the bones, and some of the ribs and things were standing vertically instead of lying flat on the ground. And you could sort of reconstruct the situation and how the boy, what had happened after he died and why he was complete. It really was an amazing experience to see it.
For almost 2 million years, his bones were preserved by the earth. Their discovery opened a window for us on an unknown world. The world of the most successful human ancestor of all time, Homo erectus. They've revealed to us that mysterious moment when almost everything human was born. Our bodies, our minds, our emotions. Think of all we've become. Trace the threads of our origins through the ancestors who went before. They all lead back to Turkana Boy and his kind, the first humans.
So what I was saying was, remember those names that are used there? I was talking about this gentleman called Bleak, was able to make a real serious career in preparing the molds. So it looks like anthropologists really do have some work to do. So it's not a discipline that is very theoretical. And the way people try to make skits there of the ancient fellow, it also shows that a lot of imagination, a lot of drama, and then imagining beyond time is actually necessary in order to create something, some kind of an understanding about an individual whom you haven't met and seen any time. But then with this small AV, you must have understood that they needed to have a very keen look, not simply an interest, a keen eye into the details. When she was actually showing the lower jaw of how the pain must have. Now it is quite possible that these kinds of smaller details might go unnoticed. So several questions have been coming to me that how is it possible that this must have happened, this must have happened. See, this is all the story that you build based on things like this. So it took a while for me to come to a conclusion on what could be a better video to show that, okay, these are the kinds of things the people might be doing on the field. Sir, I would, these of course are the details that you should be keeping in mind. You can add them as and when you are writing your answer. But let me take you to certain other very fundamental facts and numbers. These are the popularly agreed upon numbers when it comes to the life of Homo erectus, the time period of Homo erectus. They have found fossils dating back to those numbers. There can be two ways of looking at these numbers. Suppose somebody says that man had originated in, ancestors of man originated in Africa. From there they must have spread to the rest of the world. If you see that the very first, the so-called human, Homo erectus, was found in two different places, one in Asia, the other in Africa, at the same time period, this is a direct challenge at that theory. But I think the documentary had given some kind of an answer to it when they were saying this, that the fossils they have found at the site of Turkana were very much different from what they have found in European sites. European fossils seem to be much more primitive when compared to primitive in characteristics when compared to the Turkana fossils. Looking at that, they had concluded that it might be quite possible that the ancestors of Turkana boy must have migrated long before him. So it is not that Erectus was simultaneously emerging at all the places. The ancestors of Erectus or early Erectus had migrated. But then there is one other story, sir. If you see the East Africa there's an interesting thing. See, whatever fossils of Erectus we have found in southern Africa, we found them only up to 1.8 million years ago, not later to that. Be with me in the class, sir. See, before all these people were trying to narrate through those documentaries, and especially before the Dmanisi fossil had come into light, meaning I am talking about a pre-2003 time. In the pre-2003 time, the popular understanding was that, see, in southern Africa, we were not finding fossils at a time later to 1.8 million years. So only up to 1.8. And then there was some brief lull there. There were no fossils found between 1.5 and 1.6. But suddenly they found in Eastern Africa Homo erectus fossils of 1.6 million years onwards. So their question is, where did this 0.2 million years go? And one answer they tried to give us, maybe they were traveling. Now you can actually understand that such kind of statements carry a meaning. When they are able to calculate the kind of distances he must have covered starting from southern tip of Africa to Indonesia. It's all number game. So very laborious calculation rather. That is the reason why I was saying this. When they find out one tooth, even if it is a single tooth they have found, it becomes very important for a paleontologist. Because from there he would try to identify the time period. I did not say anything there. You got an answer here in today's class. When we say that the tooth of the individual can give the life and culture of them, it means it also talks about the time period to which they might belong. So at that point of time, prior to 2003, the belief was, till 1.8 million years ago, there were evidences of Homo erectus from South Africa. After that, we did not find any of, after 1.8 million years, we don't have any Homo erectus there. And then we find the next lot in Eastern Africa. They believed that maybe the people in south must have migrated to the eastern Africa. Initially, people took it hilariously. That is it that the whole community was sitting together and deciding that, okay, now we have finished our job in this area, maybe we would. It's not as such. There might have been an occurrence of a huge climate effect, or foods were becoming scarce in one part of the world, and maybe because, as the story goes, maybe along with the livestock, along with the wild animals, they were also moving to the rest of the region. So naturally, Eastern Africa they must have. So, and this was the idea they were having as far as 1.6 and 1.8 in Africa is concerned. But that kind of an understanding, that kind of an explanation could not provide the meaning of how in Asia at 1.8 we could find this man, if at all he was migrating from Africa in 1.6 million years ago you found in East Africa. How was it possible that he could have migrated to Asia at 1.8? So they gave the answer that migration must have started a long time back. And maybe possible the ones that were there in the south must have succumbed to different situations, or maybe they must have evolved into certain other species after 1.8 million years. This is a timeline. So when you are trying to write answer in the exam, you should be mentioning two different kinds of presentations. One is what was the story prior to 2003, before the Diminisci fossils were found in Europe. Once the Diminisci fossil was found, it was confirmed that Turkana boys' forefathers had migrated and they were much more primitive, and hence the story goes well. Maybe from Europe they must have migrated to elsewhere in the world also, Asia and Indonesia also. So by the time Erectus was getting evolved into full-blown Erectus, all of them must have had almost a similar line. So by 1.8 you found in Asia also, you found in Europe also. Kind of. So it's not that everybody was leaving Africa simultaneously. Some of them must have left. This was one timeline based discussion. And apart from this, there are, of course you have already written the sites, but then let me give you a small table on significance of them. Is it visible, sir, to the last? I'm afraid not. Those are some of the African sites. First site is Olduvai. 1.4 million years ago, the youngest of Erectus there. Olduvai site. That produced a tall, large individual. Which faced a question of whether he was Homo sapiens. And then there are certain other names. The second one is Neriocotum. You got it in the map earlier, Neriocotum. Neriocotum in Turkana, Western Turkana, where they found the near complete young male's skeleton. And 1.8 million years ago, Eastern Turkana. The oldest dated Homo erectus fossil. The oldest dated Homo erectus fossil. Yes. No, it's like this. Those are the multiple things now. Not even about Ramapithecus. Suppose you look at Astrolo fossils. We found Astrolo in Java and China also. It might be quite possible that those individuals must have evolved into. So, see, if at all somebody is an ardent supporter of out of Africa, he might talk about ancestor of, when he says that ancestor of Turkana had migrated, it might not necessarily be Homo erectus of the earliest form. It may be Australo itself that must have migrated. That was the story here. That was the reason why he was talking about somebody like Homo erectus alone. See, this creates a confusion there. This creates a rift there. When you are finding Australo elsewhere in the world, this might be due to two reasons. One is, maybe perhaps if at all we see the continental drift theory. The continental drift theory matches well with the Australo's time period. So it might be quite possible that when the drift was occurring, the ancestors of early Australo were already existing. It might be that way that certain regions of eastern part of the world also had given rise to Australo. But when so I put it in three ways. One, whether we are getting a confirmation about out of Africa theory. First thing is, was it Homo erectus alone that had migrated or somebody else who migrated? If at all you say that ancestors of erectus had migrated, which ancestor it could be? If it was Australo, as you say that the migration possibilities were not there with Australo because of the less walking ability. That takes us to continental drift theory, because of which the appearance of Australo had happened in the eastern part of the world. It may not be necessarily because of migration. But then to show that people must have migrated from Africa, it need not be in Australo time alone. It must have happened in the Homo erectus time also. So these people who are trying to show us the documentary, they did not believe that it was Australo that migrated. For them, actually there is a series there. In the next series he talks about this. Australo must have gone because of the continental drift. So you cannot look at the Australo of Asia as a competitor to African origin theory. He was there evolving by himself. It is quite possible that those Australo must have got evolved into Homo erectus. But these people are not buying that theory. For them, the appearance of erectus in eastern part of the world is primarily because of migration. Migration of the earliest Homo erectus, not somebody like Australo. Did you get my point? There could be a possibility of parallel evolution. At the same time, migration was also happening. Sir, these are some of the sites that you have written, but I don't know whether India was there in that map. Saukodian, Lantian, Peiping in China. This is that map. If at all somebody was wondering, every time we were talking about Saukodian, that's the eastern part there, the coastal region of China. The problem with them is for every region there is a second name. I recommend the students to go with the term Lantian. So it is only to indicate that if at all the question comes, something like the Asian Homo erectus, we recommend you to go with this map showing in Java, China. You can slightly stretch another line down here, it becomes India. So, can I go? Yeah, those are the sites of Asia. I am actually keen on these dates. Javan site brings Homo erectus very, very close to Homo sapiens. 25,000 years ago. Zaucodion erectus. Once you write the time periods, don't forget the number of zeros there. 670,000 and 410,000. So it shows that erectus must have lived for a long time. Or is it that they are mistaking some fossil for the other? Everything said and done, by now we already came to a conclusion that Homo sapiens, modern man, must have occurred at about 1100, 1200, 1000 years ago. So if I am buying that number, 12,000 years ago, was it really happening that from 25,000 to 12,000? In such a small time period of 12,000 years, somebody from 900 cc is becoming 1400 cc. Java has always been a challenge. As if there is no other place left out in the world, Astrolo we had found in Java.
Would that be because of the continental drift or
I'm going to conclude on that. Whatever numbers that I am taking here, I am taking from Skupin. So the argument regarding the Java Homo erectus, which we are going to conclude, will also be from Skupin. So the third source, first discovery of Homo erectus from anywhere in the world. This is a field wherein the success of any archaeologist lies in the way he can logically convince the people. Because after all, we are depending on certain handful of evidences. Thankfully, erectus, we have huge numbers of them. He was widespread, and almost every continent, almost every country through which he must have migrated or he must have traveled, it has yielded evidences. Now the thing that I was discussing a little while ago, suppose we believe that about 12,000 years ago modern man had originated. And here in Javan numbers, we see between 50,000 to 25,000 years ago, that was the time of Homo erectus. When we started writing numbers in millions of years, and suddenly it comes to 12,000 years of difference, it looks to be unbelievable that within such a short period of time, somebody could evolve from a 900 cc individual into a 1400 cc individual. We are actually trying to use here the very basic population genetics, where we find that because that was an island, Java was always a puzzle, I was saying. This was somebody like a hobbit. This was the hobbit fossil that he was talking about. You cannot compare with the rest of the people. Maybe because of migration from Africa before Turkana boy, or Maybe because of a parallel evolution from somebody like Astrolo of Java, this individual must have emerged. There is no conformity. There might be two routes. One that had migrated from Africa to Java, that was a Homo erectus of Java, or the already existing Astrolo must have got evolved into Homo erectus of that island. The one question that always bothers people is, how was it possible that he was continuing till 25,000 years ago? In the rest of the world, we couldn't see anything of that kind. The one answer that we can think of is maybe the isolated location of the islands, where they were propagating with those for so many years there, with very little possibility of a change or evolution. On the other hand, in the rest of the regions, maybe because of change in the climates, or maybe because of heat trying to change his area of habitation very frequently, it was quite possible that physical changes and more of a use of his skills, intellectual skills, he must have got evolved very quickly. This actually hints at a combination of your willfully changing your culture. At the same time, a biological phenomena is also quickly changing. It's as simple as, most often it is accepted that say about 21, 25, 22, you stop growing in height. But suddenly when somebody comes up, say at about 45, somebody comes up and says that, okay, I have gained height. You will have to look at the case specifically. Maybe perhaps that he was having drooped shoulders and all kinds of things, and maybe suddenly he started working out, and suddenly whatever stooped down things are there, they started to stand erect, and kind of those 1.5 inch of height he's gaining. It looks that he is gaining. We are hinting at the environment with which you are debating, with which you are dealing, and the kind of cultural things that you are employing on yourself. So this has been a puzzle. Java, that is the hobbit man. It might be quite possible that he was secluded from the rest of the ones, and he did not evolve much, he did not change much, whereas the others were changing with the environment and with the kind of habitations they were into. And this picture you had seen in the last class. These are some of the other sites there. Georgia, Spain, and Italy. Georgia 1.75 million years ago. The others are less than 1 million years ago. Unlike several other fossils, erectus provided the possibility of having a huge volume of fossils. So it was very easy for people to write stories about erectus. Italian fossils dated back to 900,000 years to 800,000 years. The evidences were cranium with a clear evidence of Homo erectus. Spanish ones 850,000 to 780,000. The oldest fossil find of hominins in Europe. Put a question mark there. We had put the question mark in the map also. People doubt if it is Homo erectus. As you make a note, I keep talking. We started our stories from one major variety of fossil called Astrolop. In the evolutionary lines, we generally take linear evolution model, the 2-branch model of Johanson White, 3-branch model of Alan Walker, some of the habilis-based models. They are one and the same for all the species, I mean all the fossil men, whether it is you're writing an evolution of Australo, you're writing evolution of Homo erectus, or even Neanderthal. So it's like you're learning one, writing the whole chapters, answering all the questions. With regard to Australo, we started our story at 5.5 million years ago. We ended it at about 2 million years ago. After which the belief is that we started to witness emergence of Homo erectus. So the last time, the last timeline is 1.8 million years ago that we have found here. So let me say this, if the question is geographical variants of Homo erectus, first you will talk about from where erectus must have come. You are mentioning out of Africa theory and parallel evolution in Asia and Africa theory, and thirdly, maybe possibly the continental drift theory. After having spoken about the arrival of Homo erectus, you will talk about different sites. You will give that world map, you will talk about different sites and what exactly you found there. Then we will come to physical features. When we talk about physical features, you will have to draw your skull, Homo erectus skull. Point out the most significant ones. Go back to yesterday's class, you had drawn some pictures there. Erectus skull. Give a freehand drawing of the skull here. You have drawn erectus skull yesterday. Give a freehand drawing of erectus skull. 3 or 4 things you are marking out there. One is the supraorbital ridges, receding forehead. You have the typical dentition there. You will talk about the nuchal torus. So based on your patience, if at all you can't draw now, you leave a space, but you'll have to fill it with. But freehand drawing will always help. Sometimes you don't have time to indicate that there is a beautiful rounded human skull. You haven't drawn anything, but you have drawn. Can I remove this? Just have a look at that. Actually, I didn't intend to talk about all of them, but there has been a coexistence with respect to time period of Rodolfensis. And so it's like this. There are several controversial fossils. Habilis was always a controversial one. Whether habilis is a species in itself, or habilis can be called as earliest Homo erectus, or is a habilis a most evolved Australo, those were the 3 arguments there. But later, see, things get complicated with more and more variants there. Once a broader conclusion had come that, okay, habilis might be considered as a species in itself, then you see certain other variants coming up. More primitive variants within Homo habilis. So if at all we say that Homo is the first human-like individual, it is not simply Homo erectus. Our story starts here. I avoided all these names because I didn't want to, one, complicate the things. Secondly, they were not anyway mentioned in your book. Now, this was also the parallel time period when the so-called the island population, the hobbit population, or Homo floresiensis, this belongs to this particular time period. For your own future reference, you may draw it. Similarly, there's one more name called ergaster. Ergaster is Homo erectus of Africa. Homo erectus of Africa. So as we see that things are moving, still Homo erectus is continued till 0.5 million years ago. We got those numbers, 25,000 and 50,000. That's where the Java variant continued. So huge lot of time there. Somewhere from 2.4 million years ago to 0.5 million years and beyond that. There is a difference between Australo and erectus in this respect. For Australo, within 2 million years, you could have seen emergence of number of species. But here within Homo erectus, not so many variants rather. Region-wise, certain specialities have occurred. Region-wise, the names have changed. As H.D. Sankalia says, there is more of regional politics rather than that species must be occurring in so very different ways. Species from one region to the other when it comes to Homo erectus was not so very well definedly different from one another. There was only 19-20 का जो भी फर्क है. But then when it comes to naming them so very differently, it is, according to Sankalia, it is a political game. Because my region had produced a fossil, I have to see to it that my name goes into history. It's mostly like that. So the summary here is, when it comes to Australo, the variants were real. So many species were real. When it comes to Homo erectus, it was the most widespread individual across all the continents. Because it was there in all the continents, it's quite possible that based on the region's environment, the characteristics, the physical characteristics must be altering. And also with the time his evolution was naturally happening, so tools were also evolving parallelly. But then number of species were not so many as we see in Australo. And sometimes the naming is primarily based on location in order to give recognition to the location itself. So these kind of understandings are necessary in order to accommodate, God knows, the kind of questions that might come. We'll make a small note. Before that, just see this picture. This is the comparison of human teeth and Homo erectus teeth. Left side is the normal teeth. The right side one is something like, if at all, there is an expanded pulp cavity there. Generally, in the human case, this is not a healthy situation. But in the case of Homo erectus, this is a commonality. That's what we say taurodontism. Taurodontism signifies two things. One is, at a first look, it looks like the torus tooth, bull-like tooth. Bull-like tooth, you must have seen bulls, the teeth. To look at the kind of massiveness, the kind of line arrangement there. Second comparison is within the gums, within the pulp cavity, the situation that looks to be unhealthy in the humans, it is a commonality for them. Now let us write a few things on Homo erectus. The physical characteristics of Homo erectus are not very diverse, from one region to the other, the differences can generally be associated with climatic conditions and the effect of cultural evolution. Sir, when we come to study the racial classifications, we would see some such rules that are guided by the location of the individual. Certain titles you come up with, such as the Allen's rule, and certain other rules are there, which indicate that, see, as you go from from the equatorial regions to polar regions, you see that there is a tendency of body bulk increasing in all the species, not simply the human, but in general also. Body bulk increases as you are going from equatorial regions to the polar regions. It seems to be a requirement of the requirement for survival. Just imagine somebody in the poles, very thin, not having enough body fat, becomes very difficult to survive. So you don't find that kind of animals on that side, that type of species on that side, not simply humans. Similarly, as you are moving from equatorial region to the polar region, you see the change in the skin tone also, skin color also. So you have more fairer individuals, fairer species as you are going to the poles, and more darker species in the. So these are some of the environment-based differences that we obviously see. That's what I mean by that. The differences are not to the extent of calling them individuals from different species altogether, but they are only regional variants, they are only geographical variants. Keep a note there, write a note there. When compared to Australo, the variations in the physical characteristics of erectus are not to the extent of defining them as members from different species altogether. Erectus has a much wider geographical spread than Australo, but has less variants. The popular variants include one, Homo erectus of Africa, secondly, of Europe, and third, of Asia. With regard to Africa, Erectus presents a categorization that is similar to Australo. A categorization that is similar to Australo. Sir, because you don't have a class tomorrow, it's only a test. Maybe we'll try to stretch a bit if necessary today. I'm not looking for your consent, I am only informing you. That is South African erectus and East African erectus. South African erectus and East African erectus. Continue writing there. The East African variant is more evolved. Slightly in terms of cranial capacity, and more in terms of cultural evolution. A comparison of lower Paleolithic tools confirm this hypothesis. Secondly, European Homo erectus is organized based on two popular finds. One was a Moyer find, M-A-U-E-R. Moyer find, write in the brackets, Homo erectus heidelbergensis. Homo erectus heidelbergensis. Moyer is the name of the cave where the jaw was found, and Moyer is very much near to another place called Heidelberg. So it is called Homo erectus heidelbergensis. Second one, the Dmanisi fossil, D-M-A-N-I-S-I, the Dmanisi fossil of erectus. Thirdly, the Asian variant has three popular categories. One, Homo erectus pekinensis, of China. Homo erectus javanicus, or the Hobbit fossil. Thirdly, Homo erectus narmadensis. Right in the next line. For HD Sancalia, most often the naming of the fossil The naming of the fossil has to do with geography rather than the significant skeletal differences. Significant skeletal differences. Right in the next paragraph. The earliest finds of erectus, were in 1890s. Initially in Asia, followed by Europe. Africa did not provide any erectus evidences till 1960s. According to Michael Day, D-E-Y, according to Michael Day, Australo and Homo features were combined in erectus. And hence can be a definite intermediary in the evolution of genus Homo. Homo erectus showed significant evolution in physical characteristics compared to Australo. But in certain aspects, especially the skull features, it was less evolved than Homo sapiens. Keep writing the characteristics. The skull features. Cranial capacity about 900 cc. Secondly, presence of nuchal torus, N-U-C-H-A-L, nuchal torus, that is a ridge of bone running horizontally along the back of the skull, in addition to the overall thickening of skull bones. Thirdly, when compared to Australo, erectus has a more rounded skull Erectus has more rounded skull. And presence of more evolved frontal lobe, which might be responsible for, so he was using this word Broca's area in the frontal lobe. You can also name this man, Holloway. Holloway's study of frontal lobe, Broca's area, which might be responsible for emergence of language, and articulating capabilities, Come down to the second one. Facial features. Compared to Australo, less prognathism, keep writing in bullet points there, more prominent and projecting nose compared to Australo, that can be confirmed with the help of the angle of the nasal root, NASAL, the angle of nasal root. Thirdly, dental arcade is more parabolic than Australo, reaching the human. Fourthly, an interesting characteristic of taurodontism, and arrangement of teeth that is surprisingly different from all the other pre-human individuals. Come to the postcranial features. Write in bullet points. Foramen magnum is placed in a position similar to humans. There is a clear evidence of, right in the next bullet point, there is a clear evidence of linea aspera. On the femur, confirming a much better and an evolved erect posture. Thirdly, broader pelvis than Australo, indicating a birth of large-brained individuals, Continue writing there itself. Though the hip bone looks similar in structure with Homo sapiens, it varies in the respect of less muscular attachments, hence raises a question regarding the muscular butt in erectus. Keep writing. According to David Pilbeam, Homo erectus female, David Pilbeam, Pilbeam, David Pilbeam, the Homo erectus female does not exhibit a pronounced sexual dimorphism even in the case of pelvis when compared to Homo sapiens. Right in the next slide. The fossil finds of erectus, can definitely confirm the hand grip, perfect bipedal gait, load bearing feet, and a possible care and emotion from the other members of the group. Right aside head there. Cultural features of erectus. G-A-I-T. Gait is posture. Bipedal posture. So let us look at some of the cultural characteristics. I am putting it in 4 or 5 major side heads. Number 1, migration of the species. With erectus, being the first in the genus Homo, being the first in the genus Homo to have attained the capability of precision hunting and ability to run long distances, it must have traveled across continents. The disappearance of erectus in southern Africa at 1.8 million years ago and reappearance in Eastern Africa at 1.6 million years ago indicates a possible migration. Migration called for cultural innovation for faster adaptation to new environments. The primary mechanism of adaptation in Homo erectus was more cultural than physical. Underline that statement. Was more cultural than physical. So as a part of that, you write down tool technology. A lot of it you already know from the lower Paleolithic writings. Tool technology. Archaeological records present. Two distinct cultural traditions. One from Asia with the primitive, large pebble tools. Second, African tradition with more evolved tools. Throughout the world, Homo erectus lived in lower Paleolithic cultural age, dominated by rugged and less sophisticated tools. Such as you can write the list, you know it. Such as hand axes, cleavers, and నోట్లో లడ్డు పెట్టుకున్నట్టు చెప్పొచ్చు కదా. You can write down hand axes, cleavers, choppers, chopping tools, and Eolithic flakes. Right on. Hunting. Homo erectus was a big game hunter. Homo erectus was a big game hunter, the evidence of which is from, you know these places still. From Torralba and Ambroma. Evidence is from Torralba and Ambroma of China, of Spain. The sites were studied by. The sites were studied by. I have used this name earlier also. Clark Homel, who found a huge volume of elephant tusks, and use of fire. The sites provided evidence of hunting of wild horses and deer. From several sites in the world, there has of late come a universal acceptance that Homo erectus must have practiced occasional cannibalism. Take some of the examples of the sites. At Ambroma, the evidence of human long bones fractured and split. Secondly, at Zaucaudion, two skulls were found with enlarged foramen magnum. Based on these evidences, Adams and Hobel, Hoebel, produced an account of cannibalism across human evolution. Underline that in quotes. Cannibalism across human evolution. I was actually planning to add one PPT to your Dropbox that's full of pictures only, but then the title is Cannibalism. Let's see, I mean, if at all you are interested in reading that, keep writing. The next one there, habitation. Erectus habitations are categorized into number one, residential, which are near to water bodies, vegetation and stocks of big animals, keep writing under the same residential. Zooxodion has been an exception of cave living by erectus, Secondly, workplaces located at the source of stone, a clear evidence can be had from sites such as Terra Amata in France. Continue under that workplace. At Zooxodion, a combination of residential and working places are found. That were later replicated from the sites of Lantean. Take the next one, use of fire. Erectus must have been the first to use fire with the evidence of oldest hearths, H-E-A-R-T-H, oldest hearths dating back to H-E-A-R-T-H, hearth, dating back to 750,000 years ago. 750,000 years ago, from the site of Escale, E-S-C-A-L-E, from the site of Escale in France. Fire must have been used for frightening big game, cooking, rituals, and as a source of light and warmth. For Clark Hummel, fire offered a place of social gatherings, building emotional and social bond, building emotional and social bonds. Right, the last one. Ritualism and religion. Ritualism and religion. There is no clear idea of religion among Homo erectus. At the sites of Toralba and Ambroma, the unnatural arrangement of long bones of humans, along with the specific animal bones, indicates a possible ritualism. Continue writing there. Burial practices that are a clear indication of belief in supernatural, had originated with Neanderthal. In Homo erectus, this is an unconfirmed cultural aspect due to the lack of such evidences. Right, in the next paragraph. Regionally, Homo erectus in Africa is believed to have evolved into Homo ergaster, which is the most evolved erectus variant. Continue writing there. In the Skupin's map of human evolution, the time period between Australopithecus anamensis and Homo erectus has no fossil man. This long gap awaits to be filled with future fossil finds. That might possibly leave the archaeologists with a new series of evolutionary sequences. With a new series of evolutionary sequences. As of now, Anamensis is the nearest pre-Homo ancestor. And Erectus was the first human ancestor to have the major characteristics that can be called, right in quotes underline, human. That's it. Write your planners. Today is 29th session, date and 4th. We were only writing about Homo erectus, the big man, and there was this video, title kya tha? You wrote? The video titled Becoming Humanity. अच्छा, कुछ तो भी था. Human evolution unearthed. Human evolution unearthed. Sir, you largely will be depending on your class notes. And apart from that, one mail you will be getting on Homo erectus heidelbergensis. Homo erectus heidelbergensis. Your next class will be totally on Neanderthal man, 2 variants of Neanderthal, and if possible, in the same class I will introduce you to Homo sapiens. I did not finish last sentence. With regard to Homo sapiens, there is one write-up in your book number 3. We'll largely be following that. So to the extent possible, I would want to make the next class your concluding class on fossil evidences, if at all I am able to finish Neanderthal in that class. And after I do that, I will come back to talk about dating methods. Okay? Have a great time. So all the best for your exam.